So this goes, and then we'll put this in behind. So, oh, here comes one of our participants.
Oh,
and we have an attendee, and Shane is with us, and more promote to his. Okay. All right. Is Shane Roberts there? Hi, Shane. How are you? Now, I can't hear you. Okay, your thing is muted. Please unmute your thing. We are live, by the way. The world is watching us, and your face is very dark because you don't have a light on it, and your camera is muted. So all of this, I'm sorry, you have to unmute your camera, your microphone. Down at the lower left-hand corner of your screen.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Okay,
Right.
I didn't see that button. All right, good. Now, the question about lighting. So, Carol, is there anything we could do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now this should have been done before because we're live and we're going to have to cut this off or do something later. All right. Anyway, hello. I'm going to introduce you in a moment by telling everybody. Right now, I'm going to say hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Metta Spencer. I'm in Toronto. And I have a couple of friends here who are trying to get themselves set up. But I am we do not have this thing planned very well today. So here's the situation. Shane Roberts, who's going to be with us on this screen as soon as he gets some light on his face, is a futurologist, I guess, or futurist, I'm not sure what the language is, based in Ottawa. And his friend David Harries is another futurist who lives in Kingston, and he will be joining us shortly, I hope. But in the meantime, I have a visitor, I have a house guest, another friend that you have not met, Shane, and David certainly will not have met. He is not a futurist, but we decided that since I wasn't sure you guys were going to be able to be on screen, that if it comes to that, he and I will talk about Palestine. Because this, may I introduce you to Abraham Weizfeld, a Montrealer who spends half of his year, every year nowadays, in Nablus in Palestine. So I've just spent the afternoon and evening so far with him. And we've had a very interesting conversation about that. And so he may chime in with some thoughts of his own as we proceed. But David, I think, is going to be trying to join us shortly, but he isn't with us yet. And so I want to just plunge right in, Shane.
Good idea.
And start talking with you about futurism or futurology or something of that kind. You are, as I understand it, a futurist, or are you a futurologist?
Well, it's funny. Futurology, I guess you could see it as close to biology, but I always was afraid it was too close to astrology. So I avoid the word. So I prefer a futurist.
You're a futurist. Okay. Well, that's okay with me if you're a futurist, although I would be a little suspicious of you if I didn't know that you were a good guy, and we're sort of friends, or we certainly are friends, but it took us a while for me to get sure that I wanted to be very risk-taking with you, because I think of a futurist as somebody who looks at a crystal ball or looks at my palm and tells me how long I'm going to live and how many husbands I'm going to have.
Oh, okay.
And as far as I know, you haven't asked to look at my palm yet. And
No.
that's why I was a little suspicious for the first few years we knew each other.
Well, I'll tell you, as a futurist, and it's, when David gets on, he can and add to it. I've chickened out of predicting the future, and the method I find is the most useful is foresight. Now, on one hand, I don't like when governments and obscure corners of experts take a good English word and attach a special meaning, but that's what we've done with foresight. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, in futures circles, foresight means instead of trying to look at one singular future, or like a weatherman, a forecast and plus or minus percentage, we look at a set of possible alternative futures. Because when you get a lot of trends going, you're not sure exactly how they're going to cross impact. So you try and find a small set and plan around that small set.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right. I mean, I don't have any objections to that. What do you say to those people who say, you know, just be ready to be flexible and be ready to jump when the wind changes?
well, if somebody gets a chance to watch the weather, and since my days in intelligence, when I found that sometimes the news media was better than top secret intelligence, I watch CBC and CTV, and right now free previews to CNN and BBC. And you watch, you don't have to watch all of those to know that you're waiting for the wind. These days, the wind can be a hurricane or a tornado. So it's good to be able to anticipate things and prepare for them. Either there's some uncertainty about exactly what's going to happen. If we prepare for possible futures, then we can be better able to A, respond to them and maybe even shape them. So, what do you feel
Okay.
about
Now,
that?
as I recall it, for some years at any rate, you worked for the Canadian government.
Yes, for three
You
decades.
and is there a special department called the Department of Futures, or where do they put a person like you?
Well, the Canadian government, much like a number of other governments in the West and in Russia, um, sort of somebody powerful enough in government to command some resources thinks, oh, this is a neat idea. And they'll set up an office, hire some people, and within a few years, I guess we're not delivering the lottery numbers, and they trash it and it disappears and shape comes up somewhere else. So in the 70s, I came to Ottawa to see what employment opportunities there were. And at that point, the Ministry of State for Science and Technology, MOST, was the home to some futurist work. That was killed.
Wait a minute. What is the Ministry of State anyway? I never heard of it.
Well, Ministry of State is a junior ministry in Ottawa, and they come and
Sorry,
go.
does it still exist, or is this something that came and went?
It came and went.
Okay.
And in fact, futures is almost as endangered as science and technology policy. Too many politicians and policy advisors are scientifically illiterate. And every few years, they set up some corner that's supposed to work on science and technology policy. And it, like futures, will thrive and then disappear. So MOST was to work on S&T policy and wanted some long-term view about what sort of science and technology were needed. In succeeding years, the National Research Council had a futurist, Jack Smith, who's very famous in Ottawa in some circles. And under Paul Martin made history by appointing the first national science advisor, sort of catching up to in Washington what the president has had for decades, and in Britain what the prime minister has had for quite a long time. And when Harper came in, he killed that national science advisor.
Sounds just exactly what I would have expected of Harper, given what I know about the other things he did. But the man must have some redeeming qualities in terms of, did he do any good? I mean, in terms of helping to plan the future of Canada?
Mhm. Well, at the time, the first National Science Advisor was the president of the National Research Council, and he brought Jack Smith with him. And then they ended up being relegated to sort of an outer Mongolia in the bureaucracy. And the National Science Advisor left, and Jack then is gone to the University of Ottawa, where a graduate program in management studies has given him safe exile. I was brought in just after 9/11, 2001, by one of the famous two Margarets. In Ottawa, there have been two famous mandarins, super civil servants. Each one followed the course of being the deputy minister, which is the highest civil servant you can be in Canada, aside from the clerk of the Privy Council. And each headed up first transport, and then was deputy minister to national defense. So Margaret and I had met when Margaret Purdy.
All right.
Margaret. So I had made Margaret's acquaintance when she was in, for a while, PCO, Privy Council Office, that's the Prime Minister's Department. And I had rushed in with the top secret reports on, I'm afraid I can't give you all the details, but it was about nuclear weapons.
Too bad for you, because that's exactly the kind of thing we want. Some examples. I'm going to press you pretty well. Stories of things that you either learned or inferred about the future. So go on. Be prepared.
All right. Well, Margaret was quite impressed because I gave her the geopolitical context of a nuclear weapons test and the danger it represented in terms of an arms race. And she was just started in that job in the Prime Minister's Department. And she put me on hold for a moment, pulled in one of her coworkers, and excitedly dragged her coworker in, another woman, and pointed to me and said, "Look, I've got my own spy." So later, Margaret Purdy, she was a pioneer, and she set up a strange office with a long name that the media, CBP, could never get it straight. The Office of Critical Infrastructure Protection and Emergency Preparedness. And that later was the seed for the Department of Public Safety. But I heard that she was looking for a futurist to try and get the government to think long-term about responding and preventing disasters. And so she gave me a crack at it, and I stayed there for 10 years, trying to help the civil service think long-term about what disasters could hit us and how to prevent them.
Okay, I'm fiddling around here trying to get David on. Oh, David, are you there? Hello, David. Hello, David. I see something that looks like some Northern Lights, or
Well, he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Terminator from my side.
Okay. Well, at any rate, you guys are friends and you have worked together. And if the Terminator is going to be able to join us with anything that looks like a human face, we will be ready. And listen, Terminator, David Harries, I want to invite you to meet my friend Abraham Weizfeld, who is sitting here beside me. We had picked a backup plan in case you guys fell through. So I'm learning now about Margaret Purdy, and what I really want to know from both of you is I want some examples of ways, or exactly what not exactly, because you can be maybe.
Whoops.
Oh, goodbye. Sorry.
It wasn't the Prime Minister?
No, I don't know who that is, but I can't talk. I want to know what this experience is like. Tell me, what do you do? Do you get people together and brainstorm about the future? I want an experiential image of what a futurist would do on a good day.
Okay. Well, I can give you 1 to 3 little anecdotes. I don't know if David's ready.
Okay.
One was in one presentation I gave to 150 50 military officers and military scientists. And that's because if you have a large-scale disaster, natural or human-made, and first responders are overwhelmed, the military is called in, such as during the ice storm. I met a platoon of soldiers, not equipped with rifles, but equipped with chainsaws to try and free the power lines. So if you've seen any footage about earthquakes and buildings collapsed, and the terrible experience of one hand trying to get sniffer dogs in, and on the other hand, people with their raw, bare hands trying to lift slabs of concrete to check the ruins for people, I presented them the idea that National Defense and the Canadian government invest in special robotics. On one hand, rubble crawlers, things that using biomimicry use the architecture of insects, little robots to crawl in and among rubble with sensors to detect the living and the dead. And then that we send self-assembling robots that were jacks, like hydraulic jacks. And we equip the first responders with exoskeletons to give them superhuman strength to lift those slabs of concrete off. So that was one incident. I haven't seen any rubble crawlers being dispatched yet by the Canadian military to different disaster scenes.
Okay, now if I understand you correctly, what you want to do is look into the future 20 years or something and say what might happen. Think of all of the different good things and bad things that might come of whatever plan you have in mind, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we just take an issue, a problem of today and do a little future speculation or imagining? Is that what the main thing we do is try to imagine all of the things that might happen?
Well, you use your imagination where the facts stop. It's one doesn't want to waste the time of scientists, engineers, policymakers, decision makers before you've done your homework. You push, it's like an exercise in intelligence. Get as many pieces on the table to see what the puzzle looks like, and then we use our imagination where the facts stop.
All right. So let's take something that you've been thinking about lately. Have you been thinking about any particular problem where you would like to apply or set up a futurist exercise or a simulation? Can we talk about doing something today that is a current issue in today's world? What might we need to do some future thinking about?
Well, I'll give you a choice. We could look at climatic change, or we could look at killer asteroids, and they represent two problems. One is a creeping problem, climatic change, creeping but climbing exponentially, and killer asteroids are the type of problem that you don't hear anything for thousands to millions of years, and then one shows up at your door knocking. So which would you like to go after?
Well, I tell you the latter at the moment, because I'm very puzzled by some emails that I just received from you where you and David had been talking about there's a killer asteroid the size of the Statue of Liberty headed toward Earth right now, and what shall we do about it? I presume this is one of your imaginary that you invented that for the conversation tonight. But in fact, is there really a killer asteroid on its way?
Metta, can you hear me?
Oh my goodness, I can see you, and yes, I can hear you, but boy, do you.
Well, you just made one of the key statements, I think, of our hour. And that is, it's not what if something happens, it's what would you do if it did happen? And all of our programs that we have listed today, and we have long lists, as you know, from our experience in May, are today's
problem. David, I can't keep my face straight. Do you have any idea?
I know. They call me, they haven't figured this out. New hard drive and everything. But at least I finally got on.
Well, it is the most hilarious.
For me, I have two poster childs of why foresight is important.
Okay.
But why also it's not a silver bullet. In 1999, 2000, and 2001, the American Corps of Engineers, a pretty major organization, did a study of New Orleans. And it said, what if a Category 5 hurricane hit New Orleans? And they spent about 6 months preparing the story of that event.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? In 2005, that story unfolded 110%.
Katrina.
Nothing in their narrative
Mm-hmm.
did not happen. Everything that they expected happened. Now, everybody read that report, but nobody did anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you do outstanding foresight with outstanding people over a period of time, unless the participants are willing to accept the insights they gain, foresight is just a waste of time. I hate to say that because I believe in foresight.
Okay, all right. I can't stop giggling at your appearance, honestly.
I'm sorry. Call me Jabba the Hutt.
Well, all right. We will now move on past this very hilarious image of you and talk seriously about a situation in which an asteroid is heading toward Earth. Now, Shane had just proposed that that this is one of the options that we could pick, and I want to pick that. Let's talk about how to handle the future of the impact of an asteroid.
Okay. The United Nations, a few years ago, in its Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, actually went after this. And it received some support, indeed, from the White House. In 2013, an asteroid, a meteorite, blew up over an industrial town in Russia, Chelyabinsk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it didn't wipe out any dinosaurs, and it didn't kill anybody. But the blast shattered thousands of windows,
yeah,
and injured some 11 to 1,500 people. The UN asked for international support, participation in 3 exercises. One was for countries and is to support astronomers and the astronomers to link up in a network so that if somebody saw something suspicious, what they call PHO, potentially hazardous object, they would get in touch with other scientists, verify it. Once verified, then start contacting governments to spread an alert. The second then was that they asked for some country, and that worked. That's off the ground. The scientists were already well ahead. The second effort was, okay, there's confirmed risk. The way the astronomy works, you might see something where you've got hours notice. You might see something where you've actually got a couple of centuries notice.
oh,
And in between months, years, decades.
mm.
So the second one was, okay, we see something. Let's forget what the time frame is for the moment. But is it reasonable for that, whatever that time frame is, that we can mount a space mission? Now, this is intriguing because from some of the meteorites we've recovered, we found they hold valuable metals. Others are junk rock. So there's basically rock and then metallic meteorites and asteroids, in turn, the mothers. And we've got a few billionaires like Elon Musk who, doing their reading, found that, oh boy, there's something to be mined from these. So there are plans going on that the UN is listening to in the private sector by people like Elon Musk and other billionaires, daydream, to develop robotic miners. And then if they have enough lead time, and one of these asteroids is headed for Earth, to send up some miners to start extracting the metal and possibly move it to, say, the moon for processing. So that's underway. But if there's an asteroid coming within the next 12 months, I don't even think Musk is going to manage to do it. The third thing the UN asked for volunteers for was that, okay, we've got something coming. It's coming faster than visionaries like Musk can respond. Who wants to undertake the response, mass evacuation? Who would like to organize the evacuation of London, Paris, Moscow? Well, guess what, folks? Nobody was crazy enough to undertake that. And in a few years, the UN dropped that request. So it's a major gap. And I've started a list. While we do know now we have decades of warning and centuries on a few big asteroids, over the last 5 years, at least a half dozen asteroids that are big enough to repeat what happened in 1900 and what is it, 1908 in Tunguska, Siberian Russia. And the meteorite came down, overheated, exploded, and destroyed. Now, the science is a bit of debate. Debate is whether or not it was 25 million or 50 million trees were flattened in Siberia. There have been a half dozen that size that have come through between the Earth and the Moon with no warning. It was sort of like, whoops, where did that come from? And indeed, they came in from the direction of the sun. Now, Canada, National Defense, and the University of Calgary have developed a suitcase-sized satellite now that can look towards the sun and try to spot those. Now, that's the type of thing we need some more foresight exercises on, develop scenarios and try to come up with different plans. If something too big is coming, we're just in trouble. We might as well take advantage.
Could we do a foresight exercise on right here and now? Could we all start thinking of the things that might happen if an asteroid were to hit? And is that the kind of thing that you would do if you were professionally engaged with this project?
I'd call David and say, David, can you supply some gutsy military people who keep their head on when everybody else is going nuts?
Yeah. The asteroid plausibility is definitely real. But let me bring the asteroid type crisis down to earth. Let's go back to 11 March 2011 in Japan. The earthquake out at sea and the tsunami. In the years since, 7 years and 7.5 years since, it is absolutely certain that everything that happened there, which was for Japan and the people in Daiichi and the area, it could have been an asteroid in terms of their personal lives. It is the poster child for foresight ignored. Because everything that happened was predicted or known beforehand. But most important in terms of foresight was the final sort of overwhelming proof that in a crisis, if something bad happens, what we can do about it depends first and foremost on the survivors, not on the first responders that are all dressed up in their fancy suits and their fire engines and their police outfits and so on. It depends on the survivors. So learning from events that are very, very significant is a major part of foresight. You can Google 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 March 2011. You can see lines of fire trucks about 20 kilometers from the event. They were all prepared, but they were useless because they couldn't get there. The police couldn't get there. The doctors couldn't get there.
Why?
The people that were able to help others were the survivors.
Well, I'm sorry, but why were these emergency crews unable to get there? What's wrong?
The high radioactivity, the massive destruction from the explosions on the roads, the fact they did not know what they were heading for because they weren't there. A crisis has a point in place. Think of Chernobyl. The people that helped most were the surviving members of the staff, even though Russia, in that time, Russia, Soviet Union, 86, did not have the sort of preparations, did not think about the sort of preparations that Japan had, is a mountainous island in an earthquake zone, vulnerable tsunamis, high technology, high confidence in their planning systems. The people that did most in the event at the time at Chernobyl were the survivors. There weren't many of them. So the number of lessons that can be learned from looking at past events as we think about plausible events in the future and how we'd handle them, very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this is interesting. When I was working with public safety and working with the Center for Security Science, which had an interesting mission, it wasn't quite beating swords into plowshares. But the Center for Security Science was part of the family of DRDC, Defense Research and Development Canada. And they were military scientists and engineers. But the Center for Security Science was tasked with helping emergency preparedness to develop new technology to deal with disasters. So we'd go to their meetings, and they were interdepartmental, so they're from across the government. And so we'd start talking about risk. And risk turned out to be that almost as many people as you had in the room, you could have different definitions. But what I've worked out for my own research and analysis, and it's probably not original, let's break risk into three corners. At one end, we've got the threats and hazards, the agents that can do disruption, destruction, and cause death. On the other hand, we have the targets of those threats and hazards, the assets and activities at risk. And that can be humans, that can be infrastructure like power lines or shelter or valuable resources. And then in each of those over time, and where foresight comes in, threats and hazards evolve and the properties of the targets. Like what David is talking about to some extent is about the vulnerability or exposure of communities or facilities like a reactor to the threat and hazard, but also then properties of it, like resilience.
What? Resilience?
Resilience. Resilience, and a term that's not, I've heard as much in the circles, but as useful as robustness. So if you, and that can be physical. So you could have housing. It meets a building code for tornadoes or flooding. Mm-hmm. But also for a community, it can be psychological robustness, mm-hmm. somehow building in a mindset of preparedness. Mm-hmm. And the third corner, which we'll throw in there, is what scientists, physical and social scientists or engineers can do to change things in either direction, to mute, blunt, block, or reduce the threats and hazards. It might be a counter-terrorist agent in the case of dealing with suicide bombing. On the other hand, scientists, engineers, including social scientists, can help us to deal with the targets. Like where David is talking about the resilience, the survivors. In the society, if we have programs to train people, much the way the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts were to be able to give first aid, other types of response like that, then we increase the resilience and you reduce the risk. Things that even if we can't immediately stop tornadoes, if we don't get a handle on reducing greenhouse gases, we can immediately take steps with students, with people, to give courses in first aid and in other aspects of response activities. What do you say to that, David?
I think at the beginning, Metta, just when my ugly face appeared here, you asked, how we got started, what we thought about this, and so on. I was convinced that foresight had value when about halfway through my early working life, I realized that if I didn't look ahead, sort of lift myself out of today's urgencies and crises and favorite activities and so on, that if I didn't look ahead when something bad happened, because I hadn't prepared, everything was much worse than it could be. And that taught me as well that foresight is a really democratic activity. There are no experts on the future. There can't be, because it hasn't happened yet. There are lots of experts in every field on earth. And of somewhat worrying to me, there are more and more experts in more and more specialized fields that frankly don't understand each other, so they can't connect. There can't be a sort of a consensus on, if this happened, what would we do together? So for me, another thing that foresight has taught me, remember the old business axiom, SWOT? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats?
No.
That is so last century, because things are moving so quickly now, and context is shifting so tremendously in ways that we don't understand, that we have to turn that around. And if we allow people to consider TOES, not SWOT, TOES, threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths. Threats, because those are the things that are coming down the alley at us fastest, that if we don't deal with soonest, we will be in worse shape. One of the threats is that every change brings opportunities. And a threat is not to recognize the opportunities in time, because the windows close very quickly these days, because change is so omnipresent and quick. Then to deal with the threats, exploit the opportunities, the first thing we should look at is not our strengths. We've known them for ages. It's our weaknesses. What do we have to do to be able to respond to threats and opportunities well, soonest, together? And then, of course, strengths. Some of the strengths we had from 1980, 1990, 2000 may not be useful anymore. So we can turn that around and deal with realities together. Every person on earth has good ideas, but only if the setting is in place for them to be allowed to come forward with their ideas will foresight be truly productive. Young, old, educated, not educated, I don't care what your orientation is in any field. Everybody has good ideas. And foresight is a space, is an activity that allows everybody to contribute. And because it's about the future, nobody is wrong. And that's a great confidence builder.
Okay. I think that David's got some great ideas, but I'd like to challenge him on some points, although maybe it's just that he hasn't had an opportunity to qualify what he means. If we take example, look at what's going on in the political arena, or we look at the internet, there are lots of ideas floating out there, but a lot of people haven't done their homework. And some ideas are frankly BS. Now, and I suspect David may have run into the same thing. One problem I found over 3 decades in government, because even in the 2 decades I spent in strategic intelligence, I found that much of they talk about, I'm an American immigrant. I learned in Canada the so-called 2 solitudes, the French and English. But I found there's another solitude in this country. And it's sort of what we used to derogatorily call the artsies, but it's the arts and humanities, which is legitimate fields, versus science and engineering. And too much of the society, it's split, and there are people who are scientifically illiterate. Now, there's a problem. I mean, I subscribe to several science magazines, and some of the stuff I understand, and some of it is completely Greek. But too much government advisors, too many politicians, too much of the public hasn't the foggiest sense of some basic science. I think that's part of the problem of when we look at trying to deal with climatic change. And the sort of attitude of some political leaders, and their disregard and disrespect for scientists. And I'm thinking of Trump, Ontario's Premier Ford, and possibly the worst case ever, Trump and Harper before that in Canada. Mm-hmm. Ideas need to be refined, cold. The ideas are good once they're based on the limits to fact, how to put things together. There's too much nonsense coming out in Canadian political circles, for example, on how to deal with climatic change. And it's because a lot of the politicians haven't done their scientific homework, their basic. So once that homework is done and we understand some constraints and some forces that we're facing, some of those threats, then I think we're in a better position to put forward ideas that are well-grounded.
Okay, well, now I'm a little puzzled when David said there's nobody who's wrong. I think if there's nobody who's wrong, then you're not going to make any progress at getting closer to the truth. Because the way you get closer to the truth is by a process of elimination. Whenever you find somebody's got a bad theory, you can trash that one, get rid of it. And what you have left are some that seem to be more likely to be closer to the truth. So I would like, I'm a Popperian. I actually studied with Karl Popper, and that was his main point of view, that the progress that you make is always by eliminating falsehood and mistakes and not by proving what is true. Okay, now, right now, I could imagine that, let's talk about, you know, the thing that is animating this whole series of weekly talk shows is a project, Save the World. Minor little project that we're going to do in our spare time. It consists of trying to save the world from 6 global threats. That is war and weapons, especially nuclear, global warming, famine, pandemics, massive radiation exposure from something like a Chernobyl or Fukushima, and now cyber attacks. Now, I could think that it's really might be a good first step for us all to brainstorm and think of all the bad things that might happen through these 6 different catastrophes, different ways in which they can all happen, and indeed the way in which each one of those threats can make the one or more or all of the others more serious and more ominous because they interact. Then, so now we're getting to a list of bad things that might happen and a list of things that in order to make any progress, we have to decide which of these bad things that we need to actually take precautions against and which of them maybe we can live with. You know, how we are actually going to eliminate ideas that are not so promising. In fact, you know, a waste of time, and spend our energies on something that really has a good chance of reducing the risk of each of these or one of them. Now, how can we do that? Can you give me some examples, or maybe right now we can each brainstorm on coming up with a list of bad things that might happen, but I want to know how the next step takes place. How do we get a little closer to eliminating ones that we can disregard because they're not very likely or that we can handle them, and then concentrate on the particular interventions that we really need to pay attention to and really need to get ready for. You have some advice. I'm really truly looking for advice. Mm-hmm.
I think David pointed in a direction to something. What he's talked about is doing our homework and looking at history, looking at lessons that were supposed to have been learned and recalling them. If you look at, say, within the bureaucracy, I found too many times people were shifted in positions of authority because of their skills as managers, but had no substantive background. So when David talks about that exercise with the Army Corps of Engineers, there's a lot of work done, and in history, there are a lot of things. And we need to, we need to have greater scientific literacy. We need to have greater historical literacy and pay attention so we're not reinventing the wheel all the time.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add, I'd like to add a word that I don't think I've heard yet. That's youth. One of the inconvenient facts for all of us is that the future will come. And we all won't be here. But the people who are young will be. And they will be the leaders. And one of the strengths of foresight, because nobody in practice is wrong when you do foresight well, is that the youth will not be wrong. And they will have the confidence to join in to the discussions.
Why
I
do you
have,
think, why do you
sorry?
think that youth will not be wrong? I mean, anybody
Oh,
can be wrong. Most of us are
it,
wrong a lot of the time, and youth are just as much as anybody. Why do you think
oh,
they're not
it,
wrong?
no, I didn't say they're not wrong. I said nobody is wrong about the future. The future isn't here yet. What happens in the future, how it happens, what it costs, what it does to us is still uncertain. And to gather people who will be the leaders in the future, who will have the primary role in shaping their future, is really important. And there are very few companies that allow young people in. I am presently involved in an operation. It'll happen on the 2nd of November in Toronto with a major financial firm. And we're going to have their 55 senior poobahs there. And they are looking at the future of some financial issues. And it is clear already that there's some uncertainty about their succession plan. Now, succession plan is not only people, it is strategy, it is resources, it is education and training. And one of the suggestions I have made is that maybe for part of this activity, we get some, I don't know, children of some of these people in there. What concerns them most? What in their families' discussions is most important or most interesting?
David, I would love to agree with you, but I could not disagree more strongly. I have had in the last 6 months a number of occasions in which I think the worst mistake that was made is that people focus entirely.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we got a halt here.
Yes, that's what I was afraid was going to happen with my computer. What it's been.
Metta?
She's been turned to a pillar of salt.
I know I'm still on. I can see my.
Yeah.
You're okay, Shane.
Yes. Okay. Now the question is.
There you go.
Oh,
okay, there we are.
We're back. Okay, let me finish. I think it's a big mistake to say, let's get these young people and we're going to count on them to become our leaders over time. And we get them young and they'll go right through our organization from 18 to the year 80. No, it does not happen. Young people have other things that go on in their lives. They might join you for 5 minutes, but then they've got to go off and do something different, and their interests are not the same, and they do not necessarily know any better than you do. In fact, they probably know less than you do about what actually needs to be done to save the future. The best place to get a succession going is to look for middle-aged people, or in fact, better yet, look for people who are about 65, because that's when they're retiring and they have plenty of free time. They've already established their careers. They have resources and they know a thing or two. Those are the people you want to bring in, the slightly younger old people, to replace the older old people. And unfortunately, I know so many groups. I've never been in a group yet that didn't again and again say we need young people. And you cannot get young people. I myself taught peace studies at the University of Toronto 20 years. And I taught those courses well, and the students liked me, and they said they had a great time. I did not produce one single peace activist out of that whole experience. They majored in peace studies and they never became activists. Maybe when they get to be 50, they'll join the peace movement and get active. That's when people actually get active. If you look at the people who are really engaged, who are really successful in their careers, in their organization, they are the older people. They're people who've been doing it a long time. So you better find out who actually is doing the work. Don't try to throw out the old people for the sake of young people who don't exist, because you're not going to get those young people to stay with you. That's not the way it works. So I think it's a big mistake to say, let's go ask the young people what to do because they're going to save us. No, they won't. Sorry.
Metta, no, I didn't say throw out the old people and get the young people. Civilization is people from one day to whatever it is now, 122 years, apparently somebody in Indonesia. Unless we gather together a range of the people who have interest in today, who have biases today, who have assumptions today, and the people who will be the leaders, whether we like it or not. We can't stop those young people. I don't disagree with the problems you outline. I haven't always had that problem. Even in things as sort of brutal as civil military relations in the former Yugoslavia, the young people have had incredible insights into their future, whether or not they're going to become leaders or not. But the young and the old and the middle old and the young, they have to be in this discussion together, because we're all here now, and those of us here this evening will not be here a long time. Somebody is going to take over from us. And if we do not include them today, they will be less likely to prepare in time for the things they will face in their future.
Go find them then. I dare you. Let's see how much success you have in recruiting these young people, because they don't want to talk. They've got other things they want to talk about, and they'll talk
Metta,
about.
go to Mount Allison University, to the new Global Affairs Society. It's unbelievable.
And come back and ask those people 5 years from now what they're doing. I'll tell you what they'll be doing. They'll be having babies. They'll be signing contracts for mortgages. They'll be buying new cars. They'll be taking trips to Yucatan, but they will not be peace activists. I'm sorry.
Okay, Metta, I'd like to challenge you. I'd like to introduce two concepts: long cycles and an orchestra. I was in concert band in high school, and there were kettle drums behind me, and then delicate oboe up front. And I played the trombone. So you have different pitches, different rhythms, different bombast, and it takes the combination of those to make a concert. And I think social movements, social progress is much the same. So I think that you probably, from your students, undoubtedly, maybe you didn't make the activist leaders you were hoping for, but I'm sure you helped contribute to a better generation of citizens, of voters, that are part of what we need for a more resilient and progressive society. So and then in terms of long cycles, in terms of one of the big challenges that I was working on with trying to get the government to think about preventing and preparing for disasters, with some things which have long germination periods and long cycles. And the problem is that politicians should think in short time frames. And so those senior policy advisors are trying to keep their political bosses happy. But a lot of things have long gestation periods, whether it's earthquakes and the slow building of the tectonic plates, or the orbits of an asteroid, or certain things to do with epidemiology and disease. But on the positive end, for progress, I'm sure that you contributed to the resilience of our society. And
I'm not blaming myself. I'm not even blaming anybody. I'm just trying to be realistic. I'm saying if you want to look at the succession of leaders who have to retire or die, you better look to middle-aged people, but don't pin your hopes on young people, because they aren't going to do it. That's just reality. That's because young people have other things they have to handle. It's just the way the life cycle is. There's too much ups and downs and changes going on in young people for them to focus on the kinds of issues that you need to have for the next generation of leaders. You want to go for people who are, I just have, Peace Magazine. We have 2 new members of the editorial board. Both of them are in their 70s or about 70. They have just joined because they have retired from teaching at universities and have some free time. Those are the people who are actually going to be available. And so be realistic. If you go out and there's a young woman that I wanted to recruit, but this is a young woman who's about to get married and move away, and I can't count on her. I'd love to have her count on her, but you just have to take reality about what people's lives are like into account when actually making some decisions about what you're going to do. So yes, you can think of a lot of things that may happen, but they're not all equally likely. And I think the most interesting problems arise after you've got your list of things that might go wrong, when you start sorting them out and say, well, which are the ones we really have to worry about, and which are the ones that we can just recognize are not likely to happen because that's just the way it's not going to happen. So we can live with the lower risk probabilities and start making plans to handle the more serious ones.
Ah, okay. Now, I'd like to challenge you on that. When you talk about low risk, if we talk about risk in terms of probabilities, and this is a starting to slice and dice in fine terms, we mean probabilities in the sense of actual history of incidences. Low probability does not mean never, it means sometime. And I think that too often in government and prepared for things, particularly in certain types of natural disasters, is there's been things that have been low probability, and there's been an assumption of, oh, it's not going to happen in my term of office. It's not going to happen on my watch. But actually, a lot of types of disasters, we don't know enough about nature to predict when they're going to happen. We just know that they're more or less likely. And so one thing that I think is important about future studies is trying to get government and leadership and industry and elsewhere to think long term is once they expand their time horizon and time frame, then they pull in things that may be a low probability, but still going to happen at some time.
Mm-hmm. I'll agree to that. But as practical people, you have to think in terms of what your resources are, which are the most likely to happen right away, and what things you can defer, right?
Yeah, but you got to find a way to prevent surprises. Be ready for surprises.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried that too often the English language is very difficult. I had a big discussion with an English professor a couple of days ago about how confusing English is. You know, rough as in a rough person, dough as in bread, and ruff, R-U-F-F, for the hair on the back of the neck of the dog. And albatross. Albatross is an incredible bird. But what do we use albatross for? Always a burden. Anyway, we had this big discussion about risk. One of the great risks is in the future, starting 10 minutes after we say goodbye this evening, there will be incredible opportunities. And if we keep focused just on the bad things, whether they happen or not, and what we might have to do for the bad things, we will not do enough to prepare for the good things that could happen.
Give me an example.
Tapping youth.
Okay. Let's go back to Fukushima.
Okay.
Explosion or earthquake, tsunami, explosion, destruction. One of the huge business opportunities was the process and the resources for it to take care of all the contaminated earth. They'd never had a thing like this before. And believe it or not, that might even affect us in Chalk River, now that we have a new system in Canada for taking care of nuclear waste. It's no longer a public issue, it's a private company issue. So there's a huge business opportunity in some of these major risks. In, what's the city in Florida that got hit the hardest? Pictures today in all the news of this house.
Mexico City?
Mexico City, yes.
Like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of the people that FEMA have brought in have just started learning about rescue operations, and every rescue operation is different. It depends on the crisis. But some rescue operations are very successful, and some aren't. Let's go before the crisis. Some people evacuated, some didn't. One of the opportunities of disasters that happen is to learn about when you should evacuate and when you shouldn't. And if you don't, what you have to do to prepare. I mean, that sounds almost counterintuitive, but crises are going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
So we have to learn the good side of the risks.
But that comes after the fact, doesn't it? After you do a post-mortem, so to speak, find out what worked and what didn't work, and then you've learned something from it.
Yes, but unless you do foresight properly, as has happened thousands of times in the past, you don't learn from the past. The minute the crisis is over, everybody goes back to normal. They don't change anything. And
right.
one of the good things about young people is they are always ready for a new idea. They will listen, and they tell stories better than old people. Mostly.
I'm on a crusade against ageism. I've just become quite a campaigner on this issue because I run into this very topic again and again and again, and it's becoming extremely heated, and I'm becoming an unpleasant old bat because I really resent it. And I don't like to be told that old people are not as interesting or as intelligent or as are able to be looking forward as
Metta, I didn't say that.
True. I don't think young people have any corner on that particular market. Anyway, we have used up our time, and here we are, right, just getting into the thick of a fight, just in time to end the whole conversation. How can we do this nicely?
Well, I'd like to, if I don't know if you're going to get feedback, if you find out that there's interest in the audience for taking this further, bashing our heads on some arguments, but expanding the discussion, I'd like to do it again, because I think there's a lot of ground we didn't touch at all so far.
We sure didn't. I think there's a whole lot more. After the number of futures is supposedly infinite, I suppose. Anyway, David, please tell me what in the world you have done with that computer, because I want to have a photo of myself looking just the way you do, like you're made of satin.
With Jabba the Hutt.
Something is happening to your computer that is I've never.
No, honestly, the computer was completely rebuilt, and this Zoom worked this morning clearly. It's not as bad as it was before the hard drive failed, but I got to admit, I am a little surprised. So I apologize.
I think it's
for
really
the undercover operation.
I really was laughing the whole time. What is that behind you anyway? It looks like something out of a supersonic jet or something. What is that behind you? Is that a bookcase or something made of satin?
It's a bookcase behind me, yes.
A bookcase made, and books all made of satin.
Yeah.
What you've done is it's a partially enciphered image there. He's obscuring what's behind him.
Well, then the two security things, one's Kaspersky and one's Norton 360, so you can blame them.
So you happen to be the most interesting feature I have ever seen on this talk show.
Okay.
Image of David Harries is going down in history.
Metta, I'm glad I contributed.
Thank you, guys. It's after 9 now, so I'm going to say good night.
Okay.
Bye.